If you've been chilling out over the weekend, if you've not been paying any attention to the news, you don't know what on earth I'm talking about, shall I bring you up to speed? The whole Lee Anderson argument. It's all following comments that he actually made here on this station. He's been suspended now from the Tory party as a result. So settle in. Let's remind ourselves about what on earth has been going on.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Starmer as well.
Right, well, there you go. And for context, he was responding. I don't know if you remember this. Suella Braverman, she wrote a letter, I think it was in the Telegraph, where she basically said the Islamists, the anti-Semites and the extremists have got control. So that's what he was responding to. I think it was on Martin Daubney's programme. Anyway, listen, let's look at what Sadiq Khan had to say in response.
Look, these comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist. We've seen over the last 2 days confirmation that over the last few months there's been an increase in anti-Muslim cases by more than 330%. These comments pour fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. And I'm afraid the deafening silence from Rishi Sunak and from the cabinet is them condoning this racism. And I'm afraid it confirms to many people across the country that there's a hierarchy when it comes to racism. I think it's really important to call out anti-Semitism. It's really important to call out misogyny. It's really important to call out homophobia. But surely it must also be important to call out anti-Muslim hatred.
Important it is. So let's listen then to how Rishi Sunak responded to it all.
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words and do not inflame tensions. The most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Indeed. Well, I can tell you now, I'm going to let this topic breathe because we're going to do the whole hour on all of this. So I want your thoughts on it all. Lee Anderson, the response from the Tory party, was it enough or not? I want to talk about MP security. I want to talk about the latest developments as well in the Commons with Sir Lindsay Hoyle saying that the SNP are not going to get their debates basically on the Gaza situation. And of course, I want to talk as well about some of the protest activities that have been taking place and double standards as well when it comes to policing. So there's so much I want to get into with all of you. But let's start with the comments made by Lee Anderson. Alex, what do you think to those? Do you agree with them or not?
Well, to start with a bit of housekeeping, and no offence to this channel on which I enjoy appearing, I think it demonstrates why it's a bad idea to have elected politicians appearing as presenters on television shows. I think it puts the channel in a very awkward position. I appreciate on this example he was actually appearing more as a commentator than as a presenter. Yep. But when people make the news, there are also those in charge of bringing it to you. I think there's an obvious awkwardness. Just one man's opinion.
Well, I've got to say, by the way, just for the transparency, I have said before, I personally don't think serving MPs should be presenting on any channel anyway. And that's the beauty of this station. We're a broad church of opinions. Obviously, people think differently to that topic. Hence, we have the setup that we do. But anyway, continue.
It's just my view, and I have no problem with such people being commentators. And in that commentary role, it seems to me that Anderson expressed himself blunderingly, but had a point. And effectively, the fuss over it is letting our Mayor of London, and indeed the Leader of the Opposition, off the hook in the current circumstances. We've got to remember that the Mayor of London is not just responsible for its administration. He's also the Police and Crime Commissioner for our capital. And it may sound strange, given that it's from a Red Wall MP, an outspoken kind of Red Wall MP, but it might be more difficult for viewers who aren't in London to understand quite how bad the domination of major transport centres and major streets in London have been in recent weeks, week after week after week, not just once or twice, of people saying they want to bring our capital to a standstill and bellow abuse of the worst kind. So, Anderson may have expressed himself poorly, but it demonstrates, to my mind, it demonstrates the media class's comfort zone. They prefer to talk about how much they don't like Lee Anderson rather than talking about the issue he was, no matter how inexactly, trying to identify.
Well, we're definitely going to be talking about the issue that he was trying to identify. Don't you worry about that. But Scarlett, your thoughts on Lee Anderson and what he said said and the way he said it?
I think what he said was really shocking. And I think that if you had put the words Judaism instead of Islamist, he would have been out the door in 2 seconds and he wouldn't be on this programme anymore. And I remember... not so long ago, David Baddiel wrote a book called Jews Don't Count, which basically said, that on anti-racism, Jews didn't matter. And I have felt for some time that it's the same for Muslims. And I'm really worried, actually, about the anti-Muslim feeling that there is. And I think that we have to be very, very careful about it. And I just think that what Sadiq, whether you agree with him or not, what he does is he acts as Mayor of London. He does not act as a Muslim, and it's very important. And when he said that, he talked about anti-Semitism. I mean, you talk to the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Board of Deputies, about the work they do with Sadiq, and it's a lot, right? And he works with Christians. He's always, long before he was mayor, long before he was an MP, he's always done interfaith stuff. And I think it's very, very important. And when Saida Warsi, who is a Conservative peer,
Sort of.
Well, she is. She was put in there by David Cameron.
Yeah.
And she's a Muslim peer, and she called it out for what it is. And I think that we have to be very, very careful. And remember, I'm Labour. I've been through Corbyn, right? And I've watched what happened when Corbyn didn't actually take a firm stance on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and he allowed things to happen that were appalling, right?
I respect a lot of that. I certainly respect the point about your experience in Corbyn. I also acknowledge the point that you make about the need for care. But there is a distinction that Anderson made in his remarks, whatever people disliked about them, between Islam in general and an Islamist tendency of extremism in particular. And we do have a problem within Islam in this country. And if we can't acknowledge it and talk about it in the same way that we're willing to talk about right-wing extremism, if we're not willing to identify it and talk about it, then we are betraying the public. And it's a knowing betrayal of the British public, given the amounts of threats that are apparently being offered to our members of Parliament, which the left are predominantly identifying.
But actually, what he said was that Sadiq was basically him and his pals who were Islamists, and that's what. He didn't say that.
His
Islamist mates, right? His Islamist mates, and that is completely and utterly wrong. And I agree that there is extremes on all sides, right? Yeah. And what's interesting is that people were very, very worried about. When I say serious violence, I'm talking about bombs. Nothing like that has happened. Sure. We've had no Islamist violence, right?
Look, this wasn't. I don't regard this as directed to. He may have felt that it was, but I don't feel this was regarding Sadiq Khan's own racial background. Not least or religious.
Islamist mates.
Not least because in the same sentence he said, and Keir Starmer, who was not a Muslim. He was saying these people are pushovers. They are letting these people have their way in our capital when they should be standing up for law and order. That, I think, was his point.
I just think you don't. I think it is really, really dangerous what is happening about it. And I've said the same thing to Nigel Farage on his programme when he said, I'm worried about the right, there's a Muslim party, and we don't even go there,
I take
right?
your point about the need for care, but I also think it's dangerous to have people on the streets thinking they control our streets, shouting death to Israel, from the river to the sea, death to Jews, and so forth. I think that's dangerous as well. And my point is, our media class, by and large, is much more comfortable slagging off Lee Anderson than talking about that.
Well, yeah, and I think that this has become quite an interesting distraction from what a lot of people's concerns actually are. And of course, I mentioned at the start of the programme that Sir Lindsay Hoyle, I'm telling you now, he will be breathing a sigh of relief over that last weekend. I could tell you that because it was all, of course, on him. Can I just ask you, though, because Lee Anderson made a specific point about a specific situation. So what he was talking about was he wasn't talking about Muslims en masse. He was talking about Islamists. And as I understand it, he was referencing it to the whole situation around a lot of these marches.
He was talking about Sadiq's mates. That's he was talking about Sadiq's mates. Remember, when the Labour guy, ex-Labour guy in Rochdale, was found to be talking about Jewish, the influence of Jewish journalists, he was thrown out, right?
But I just want to check this, because As far as I understand it, Lee Anderson is not conflating an Islamist with your normal average Muslim. But are you? Because you're saying that when he's talking about Islamists, you're saying this is Islamophobic and it's fueling anti-Muslim hate. So it's you that's making that conflation.
No, actually, to quote Saeed Avasi, when one talks about Zionists, it is often used to really talk about Jews. When you talk about Sadiq and his Islamist mates, I think you're in trouble. That's what I'm saying.
It's different for me, at least in two. I appreciate the point you're making, and I do think some people use that as a cipher. But not all Jews are Zionists. Indeed, many Jews think that the foundation of Israel was a mistake.
Yes.
Equally, not all Zionists are Jews. I'm a Zionist and I'm not a Jew. Right? So you can those two things don't necessarily go together. But whatever you think of it, Zionism is about another country. It's about another state. And I think there are a couple of interesting things about that, not least because the Islamist tendency in this country, if we can describe it like that, isn't just about our relationship with Judaism. It's about not believing in British democracy. It's about wanting to restore the caliphate, ignoring the fact there were two, and which one would you want? But anyway, they want to do away, basically speaking, with our way of life. And allowing that to fester is probably a mistake. Having Islam in our country, thriving as a part of our culture, totally fine. Islamism, the point that he was making, is different. Now, you were saying if you substituted the word Jew for Muslim in Anderson's remarks, then you'd have another thing coming. But Jews aren't marching by the thousand in our capital calling for the deaths of others or for their eviction from countries. So it's rather different.
I've got to say, I do think there's a really strange thing going on, which is this conflation that if someone raises a concern about what is regarded as an Islamist perspective, which is quite an extreme one, wanting to replace the way and the whole structure of society, the principle of the laws in this country and the political systems and all the rest of it, if one raises a concern about that and correctly identifies it as an Islamist perspective, there does seem to be this notion now that in order to shut down those concerns and perhaps to turn a blind eye to them or not have to address them, because let's face it, it's uncomfortable, let's call people Islamophobic to shame them into silence. Do you agree with that?